Hi, and welcome back to the greatest story of the 80s, told through its tunes. I completed 80s music. I'm your host, the 80s Mixtaper, and today we navigate the end of 1981. Yes, we have reached the final full playlist as we blitz our way through December, and the songs which saw out the year. So we're covering the back 6 songs of playlist 33, and today we're dropping in all bands and singers we've met before. The Rolling Stones start to hint that hiatus is near. Foreigner drop one of the most iconic neon-drenched songs of the entire decade. Altered Images have their other moment in the sun outside of Happy Birthday. Jon and Vangelis make a triumphant return. Rod Stewart is still youthful in his 30s. And ABBA strike the somberest of notes to finish with. As always, we can't play the songs on the pod due to copyright laws, but if you visit the episode description, you will find playlist links for both Spotify and Apple Music, plus a full track listing so you can just switch between the pod and your music platform. Anyway, let's not stand around on ceremony today. Let's get back to the music. In 1981, the Rolling Stones were still arguably the biggest band on the planet, fresh off the massive success of Start Me Up, which we heard in episode 28.5. But if you looked behind the curtain of their album Tattoo You, you wouldn't find a band firing on all cylinders in a room together. Instead, you'd find a collection of great stuff sitting in the can, outtakes from the previous decade that associate producer Chris Kimsey sifted through because Mick Jagger and Keith Richards weren't getting along very well enough to write new material. Indeed, Start Me Up was a song hammered into existence from years of outtakes and studio tinkering, given new life by a band that simply refused to fade. This brings us to the album's emotional centrepiece. It's a track that feels like a sunset in the East Village, a rare moment of vulnerability from a band known for its swagger, but is less concerned with bravado and Mick's onstage antics, and more of a kind of battered, durable camaraderie. This song to me personally always feels like one last nod of the biggest band in the world before a hiatus. Drinks before departure. That song is Waiting on a Friend. This is track 8, playlist 33. Press play now. We think of the Rolling Stones as timeless. Indeed, they are still touring and they released the album Hackney Diamonds in 2023 and very good it was too. But Waiting on a Friend is a literal time traveller. While it was released as a single in November 1981, the backing track was originally recorded 9 years earlier in late 1972 during the Goat's Head Soup sessions in Kingston, Jamaica. Because it dates back to 1972, the guitar you hear isn't Ronnie Wood's, it's Mick Taylor's, though he originally went uncredited for the performance. Basic rhythm, a few chords, and then for nearly a decade, it gathered dust. When the band revisited the track for Tattoo You, it was just a gentle instrumental. Mick Jagger added the lyrics in 1981, shifting the narrative from his usual playboy persona to something more mature. He famously noted that the song isn't about a woman, but about the virtues inherent in true friendship. It has a direction that speaks to age and perspective. The lyrics couldn't be clearer. I'm not waiting on a lady, I'm just waiting on a friend. It's direct, even plain spoken for a band so often wrapped in myth and double entendre. This sentiment was poignant given the era. By the mid-1980s, the Stones would enter a bitter Cold War hiatus, with Mick and Keith barely speaking as they pursued solo projects. To finish the track, the Stones brought in jazz legend Sonny Rollins. Jagger later admitted he was terrified to ask a giant like Rollins to play on a rock record, but the saxophonist agreed, reportedly asking Jagger to dance the part out in the studio so he knew where to play. The song's legacy was cemented by its music video, directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg. Filmed on July 2nd, 1981, Jagger on a stoop at 96 to 98 St Mark's Place, East Village, a slice of rock history that Led Zeppelin fans know from the Physical Graffiti cover. Keith Richards ambles over, they walk, talk and hit a bar. It's simple, unforced, nearly documentary. No one's pretending to be a teenager. Jagger's not running from the cops. The Stones, for once, aren't performing. They're just inhabiting their years. But it does kind of feel like Mick and Keith weren't entirely bought in. Keith's body language especially feels not quite there. Perhaps a metaphor for times to come. By 1981, the Stones were heading into their first real period of uncertainty. Tattoo You brought them time, but the band's members had already scattered into solo projects and private lives. Waiting on a Friend feels like them marking time, acknowledging that what's left, when the shows stop and the hits dry up, it's the people who stuck around. It's an honest song, and in the Stones' catalogue, honesty can be harder to find than satisfaction. For track 9, we have one of the most epic songs of the 80s, on both sides of the Atlantic. We are back with Foreigner. We introduced them in episode 30.5, and they were standing on the street corner with a guitar over their shoulder, watching the stars come out through the eyes of a jukebox hero. That song was pure ambition, guitars, sweat, and the mythology of rock stardom. The band had just undergone a radical surgery, trimming down from a 6-piece to a leaner, meaner quartet. They were working with Mutt Lange, the producer who was simultaneously turning Def Leppard into a precision-engineered stadium machine. Foreigner was a hard rock band. They were the hot-blooded guys. They were the dirty white boys. But then something shifted in the air at Electric Lady Studios. Foreigner is mid-career but not resting easy, recording their album 4. Guitarist Mick Jones began tinkering with a melody that felt different, softer, more atmospheric, almost mystical. To bring it to life, they brought in a 19-year-old synthesizer wonderkind who we've met before, named Thomas Dolby, who had just flown in from London thinking he was there to work with The Clash. Instead, he spent the night alone in the studio, layering ambient Eno-esque drones on a mini-moog while the rest of the band slept. The result was a song that didn't just climb the charts, it parked itself in all 80s kids' subconsciousness, like a stubborn tenant who refuses to leave, and remains there to this day. It's a single so saturated with synth that it sounds like sunrise refracted over water. Lou Gramm's voice holding a note somewhere between hope and exhaustion. If you are an 80s kid and in the noughties played GTA Vice City, this one's for you. No, it's not Broken Wings, that comes later. This is Waiting for a Girl Like You. Press play now. What a song. But Waiting for a Girl Like You is actually the ultimate runner-up in pop history. Released in October 1981 as the second single from the album 4, it achieved a statistical oddity that defines its legacy. It spent 10 consecutive weeks at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 without ever hitting number 1. For 9 of those weeks it was held off by Olivia Newton-John's Physical, and for the 10th by Hall & Oates' I Can't Go For That No Can Do, which we'll be hearing on this pod later. It is the bridesmaid of the 80s pantheon. But being number 2 for that long creates a different kind of saturation. It becomes the wallpaper of a decade. This is why, decades later, when Rockstar Games needed a song to define the neon-soaked late-night heartbreak of Grand Theft Auto Vice City, this was the track they put on Emotion 98.3. It's the sound of driving through a digital version of 1986 Miami, the city lights reflecting off the hood of a cheetah, whilst Thomas Dolby's massage music synths, as drummer Dennis Elliott dismissively called them, shimmer in the background. It's also made its way into movies like Win a Date with Tad Hamilton and TV shows like Family Guy. Decades later, it remains a go-to for directors wanting to summon the feeling of a certain time, a certain ache in the 80s. The vocal performance by Lou Gramm is famously his best, and according to legend, was sparked by a literal ghost in the machine. Gramm wrote in his autobiography that while he was recording the vocal, a beautiful, mysterious woman appeared in the control room, watched him through the glass, and then vanished. He never saw her again, but the yearning in his voice that day became the blueprint for the 80s power ballad. Robert John Muttlanger is, of course, producing, as we mentioned. If you know the name, you know what that means. Perfectionism, takes upon takes, the pursuit of a shine so bright it could blind. The mix is dense but never cluttered. Graham's vocals float in the centre, not pleading, just stating. The lyrics aren't poetic stunts or overwrought drama. They're direct, even plain spoken, which works. No clever inversions, no attempts at subverting anything. It's yearning undiluted. The song's legacy is less about reinvention and more about flawless execution. A band making soft rock without apology. A single that showed the genre's commercial power in the early 80s. It's still regarded as one of the definitive power ballads of its era. It was a turning point. It made Foreigner more sophisticated, but it also sowed the seeds of the band's eventual fracture. As Graham later worried, these slicker ballads were pulling them too far from their hard rock roots. But for 10 weeks, in 1981 and 1982, and forevermore, the world didn't care about the roots. They were just waiting. For our next song, we're reaching back to the indie parties of yesteryear. This song is a builder. 5 minutes and 38 seconds of pure sticky dance floor strut. The spoken verse short after a superb guitar riff, which drops in at 2 minutes and 32 seconds. Altered Images were the darlings of the post-punk scene, fresh off the massive success of Happy Birthday, a song famously produced by Martin Rushent, which we heard in episode 29.5. A song that for a brief moment seemed to be everywhere. That track catapulted them from Glasgow's cult venues to the top of the charts, but it also created a peculiar tension within the band. They were balancing the moody, Banshees-influenced grit of their debut album with a newfound glittering power pop sensibility that the public couldn't get enough of. As they moved towards their second album, Pinky Blue, they fully embraced the super producer touch of Martin Rushent at his Genetic Studios. Rushent, fresh from his genre-defining work with the Human League, was the architect of a new, polished sound that combined programmed technology with live instrumentation. They traded in the birthday cake for something a little more restless. The lead single from this new era was I Could Be Happy. Released in December 1981, this is track 10. We're back, and that shimmering high-pitched vocal you just heard is of course Claire Grogan. But the story of I Could Be Happy actually begins with Happy Birthday. In a later interview, Grogan revealed that the two songs were originally a single mishmash track, produced during their sessions with Stephen Severin. It was Martin Rushent who recognised that they were actually two distinct songs, saving the I Could Be Happy section to be the cornerstone of their second album. With I Could Be Happy, you get bright guitars, a kinetic rhythm section, and a melody that's direct and unpretentious. Grogan sings about the possibility of happiness, but there's a pointed uncertainty in her delivery. The track exemplifies the band's shift towards new pop, a sound that was bright and melodic, yet, as critics often noted, shrouded in melancholy. The lyrics evoke whimsical daydreams of climbing trees and holiday escapes, a sharp contrast to the darker guitar-led music of their debut. Released as a precursor to Pinky Blue, the single peaked at number 7 on the UK singles chart in January 1982, spending 12 weeks in the top 100. It didn't just hang around the UK charts though. It reached the top 40 in Australia and Ireland, and even marked the band's only appearance on the US charts, hitting number 45 on the Billboard Dance Club Songs chart in April 1982. The packaging was just as deliberate as the music. The sleeve was designed by David Band, who the band championed to ensure their records were seen as pieces of art. While the record company eventually insisted on putting Grogan on the covers to capitalise on her growing fame, fuelled by her role in the film Gregory's Girl, the band fought to maintain a sophisticated, unique image. The music video is worth a mention. It's playful, colourful, almost absurd. Altered Images fully leaned into the theatricality of the moment, dressing up, mugging for the camera, and betraying none of the self-seriousness that weighed down so many of their peers. Despite the single's success, the parent album Pinky Blue, released in May 1982, received a lukewarm reception from the British music press. Critics like Neil Tennant and Smash Hits called it a big disappointment, and the inclusion of a cover of Neil Diamond's Song Sung Blue was frequently cited as a misstep. Despite this, I Could Be Happy remains a definitive moment in the early 80s new wave scene, a perfect distillation of Martin Rushent's production genius and Claire Grogan's singular presence. And when that guitar kicks in midway through the song, the dance floor always goes wild. Next, we're back with two artists who we only met one other time on this pod, and it was in the very first episode. This next song is number 420 that we've covered, but we originally met them on the 31st of December 1979, track 3, playlist 1. Jon Anderson and Vangelis. They had just released I Hear You Now, a track that signalled a strange synthesizer-led pivot for Jon Anderson, a man who had spent the 70s fronting the definitive progressive rock band Yes. Anderson's crystalline tenor riding atop Vangelis' lush keyboard textures. Their collaboration is born in serendipity, a friendship, a few studio sessions, not a grand industry plan. By 1980, that pivot became a clean break. Jon was out of Yes and into the studio for his solo album Song of Seven, while Vangelis was busy winning an Oscar for Chariots of Fire in 1981. But the magnetism of their partnership remained. In July 1981, they released their second collaborative album, The Friends of Mr. Cairo. Initially, it didn't have the hit on it. It was a nod to film noir and old Hollywood, featuring the sprawling title track and State of Independence, a song that would later become a massive hit for Donna Summer. But as the year 1981 wound down, the duo realised the album needed a catalyst, a single that could cut through the electronic fog and find the human heart. That came in the form of the song I'll Find My Way Home. This is track 11. This song is another which reminds me of being sat in the lounge on a stool, towel draped over my shoulders, while my mum gave me a pudding bowl haircut as this song played on Radio 2 in the background. Good times, I digress. The story of its creation is a masterclass in spontaneous combustion. Unlike the meticulously layered epics of the 70s, this track was born in a single afternoon. The year is 1981. Jon Anderson is in his car when he receives a call from Vangelis. The Greek composer has a new chord sequence, and he wants Jon to hear it at Nemo Studios in London. Jon goes straight there. In a session that lasted just 3 hours, the song was written, arranged, and recorded. Jon listened once and began singing lyrics. By the second listen, the structure was essentially complete. The track opens with gentle, inquisitive notes. Vangelis using synthesizers, not for spectacle but for warmth. Anderson's voice enters almost unadorned, the lyrics unfurling in plain language. Hope, perseverance, the promise of inner return. There's no posturing, no coded message. The melody is simple, repeated, almost stubbornly optimistic. The lyrics are uncharacteristically plain for Anderson, eschewing his usual dense allegories for hymn-like phrases about doubt and reassurance. It's a song about being lost, but trusting in a cosmic reassurance that you will eventually find your path. Released as a single in November 1981, it became a massive European success. It hit number 1 in Switzerland and Poland, number 2 in Ireland and the Netherlands, and peaked at number 6 on the UK singles chart during the Christmas and New Year period. Critics don't struggle to interpret it. Record Mirror calls it uplifting without saccharine, reflective without melancholy. It was so successful that Polydor quickly reissued The Friends of Mr. Cairo in January 1982 to include the song as the opening track. It remains a signature hit for both artists' legacy, a 4-minute and 20-second second triumph of the art of the pop song that proved Jon Anderson didn't need a cape or a 20-minute drum solo to find his way home. It's just what it says. A warm place to return to, wherever you start from. For track 12, one of my favourite Rod Stewart songs from the 80s. In 1980, we left Rod Stewart with passion, way back in episode 15.5. A man who had successfully navigated the turbulent transition from the gritty 70s rock and roll of the Faces into the polished world of disco-infused pop. It charts well, gets radio play and keeps his name in rotation as the 80s roll in. But Stewart's already restless. That same year, the 1980s proper began, and with it came the arrival of MTV, a new landscape that demanded not just music, but visual energy. Rod, ever the savvy navigator of trends, was about to embrace this new era, leaning into synths, drum machines, and the slick production that would define the decade. Our next song is a brilliant narrative, a story with a beginning and an end, which Rod himself has described as the area in which he feels most comfortable as a songwriter. It captures the spirit of the times, the urgency and rebellion of youth, and became an early classic on a brand new television channel. This is Young Turks. Press play now. Released in December 1981 on the album Tonight I'm Yours, the song was a substantial hit, peaking at number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the US and number 11 in the UK, while topping charts in Canada and Israel. The lyrics, penned by Stewart, tell a vivid story of two young lovers, Billy and Patty, who run away from their constrained lives to pursue their dreams. The track unfolds a narrative of youthful determination, featuring lines like, "We got but one shot at life, let's take it while we're still not afraid." It's about two kids making a choice because they think they have to. The famous chorus often leads to the song being misidentified as Young Hearts or Young Hearts Be Free, centres on that very phrase, Young Hearts Be Free Tonight. The music was composed by Carmine Appice, Dwayne Hitchings and Kevin Savager. The recording process marked a technological shift for Stewart's sound. Drummer Carmine Appice noted that it was an experiment using for the first time a drum machine in place of real drums. Appice added hi-hat and cymbals on top of the drum machine to introduce dynamics. The track utilised keyboards and sequencers, giving it a definitive synth pop and new wave sound that Rod was adapting to at the time. The songwriting team is also worth mentioning. Appice brought a rock pedigree from years spent with Vanilla Fudge and others. Savager and Hitchings were steeped in the new wave and pop sounds that were working in 1981. Stewart, for his part, wanted a hit that didn't sound like everything else in his catalogue. The song was produced by Stewart and Jim Cregan. The music video, directed by Russell Mulcahy, was filmed in downtown Los Angeles in the summer of 1981, and it became an early MTV classic. This visual presence helped maintain Rod's strong connection to a new generation of music fans, showcasing his ability to stay current in a rapidly changing media landscape. Young Turks is Stewart adapting without pandering. He doesn't trade his rasp for a robot voice or chase a trend because he has to. He finds out what works, builds on it, and then gets out of the way. That's why the song still lands. It's not a lecture, it's not a think piece, it's a snapshot of two young people who decide to leave and see what happens next. That's where Stewart was in 1981, dead set on moving forward, but not interested in rewriting his story. Sometimes that's enough. Young Turks is proof. Finally, for playlist 13, we end on a sombre note. The disco has died and the glitter is starting to look a lot like frost. When we last spoke about ABBA, we were dancing through Lay All Your Love on Me, a track that felt like a final, desperate grasp at the discotheque. It was a hit, but it was an outlier. A 12-inch remix that conquered clubs while the band itself was retreating into the shadows of Polar Studios. By the time they gather to record their 8th album, The Visitors, the internal geometry of the band has shifted. The second marriage, Benny and Frida, has ended in divorce following Bjorn and Agnetta's split years prior. The studio is no longer a place of joyous atmosphere, but one of clear tension, according to contemporary reports. They aren't writing about dancing queens anymore. They are writing about the Cold War, isolation, and the regret of leaving. And then comes this song. It's the lead single, though manager Stig Anderson is reportedly hesitant because of its depressing lyric. It's a track about a woman trying to rebuild a house and a life she voluntarily dismantled. This is One of Us, track 13 our final track today. One of Us was recorded on October the 21st, 1981, under the working title Mio Amore. It features Agneta on lead vocals, delivering a performance that Billboard would later describe as encapsulating the emotional depth baked into the group's history. It's a song of subtle orchestration, mandolins, and a chorus that sounds like a collective sigh. Songwriting always began the same way, Benny and Bjorn working out demos, then bringing in Agneta and Annifrid for vocals. The recording of One of Us went through several drafts before landing here, and Agneta's vocal take is central to why the song works. It's not a show of power, but a kind of resignation, and that's the line the song walks all the way through. Released December the 7th, 1981 in the UK, One of Us climbed to number 3 on the UK singles chart and hit number 1 across parts of Europe, Germany included. No US release thanks to a label dispute. Despite the band's internal fracturing, One of Us was a massive success, becoming their final number 1 hit in several European countries and their last major hit for 4 decades. The music video, directed by Lasse Hallström, literalises the theme. We see Agneta moving furniture into a new house, interspersed with the 4 band members standing against a wall of mirrors, looking like individuals who happen to be in the same room. At this point, it's pretty clear ABBA's era is closing out. They never officially split, but after The Visitors, the curtain dropped for decades. After this, there's silence, at least from ABBA as a working group. There were still single releases, and we will definitely be hearing The Day You Came on this pod, but that's a weird song. One of Us sticks around though. It gets covered, remixed, slotted onto every greatest hits. But for all the polish, it's the exhaustion underneath, the sense of something ending, that makes it one of ABBA's most honest singles. That's the story, no myth-making, no broad cultural sweep, just a song released at the end of a band's run, carrying more years and weight than most pop groups ever get to. So that's all she wrote for Playlist 33, and now we have one more song to go to close down 1981. In fact, Muggins here should have really tacked it on to Playlist 33, but I'm nothing if not a stickler for convention, so join us next week for one song by Kool and the Gang on Playlist 34, and then the end of the year show, where I will take a look back on the year that was 1981 and pull out a few highlights, chuck some awards around, and then talk about the context of things going into 1982. Mad to think we're already a fifth of the way through this journey and 422 songs deep. It's already been quite a ride, and thank you to anyone who's stuck with it from the beginning. Anyway, until then, have a lovely week. Take care.